Okay, so Díomh Cordia, agus for cé míle fáte go Ireland's future, Sra Cora Oscailta, ila mín panel cainte ag play Telki on Ilan Seo. Good evening all, and you're very welcome to Ireland's Future, a series of open conversations where panellists discuss the future of this island. My name is Ola Majeko Dumi, and I'm chair of this very interesting conversation tonight. And I'm in the wonderful city here in Waterford, Nadesha, and I'm delighted to be here. It's Ireland's oldest city and one of my favourite cities, so I'm really glad to be here. And thank you to the organisers as well, Jerry Carlisle and Patricia McBride as well, for having me here tonight. So to tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm involved in this event tonight, I'm a journalist, broadcaster, writer and a Gaeilgeoir, and I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, but raised in Dublin. And I have always been very interested in the Irish language and identity from a very young age, and I believe this is a recurring conversation that all backgrounds, regardless of race, religion, and so many other things that divide us, should be a part of tonight. We have a stellar panel here today. Amongst speakers, we have experts on academia, business, history, and politics. You'll be hearing from David Cullinan, Sinn Féin TD, Dr. Jennifer Kavanagh, law lecturer from Waterford IT, Niall Gaffney, Ógra Fianna Fáil, and Andrew Clark, activist and owner of website Tonistry. And also we have John Mcsweeney at the far end there, president of Waterford Chamber of Commerce, and you're all very welcome here tonight. So the layout of this conversation tonight will be a 5-minute speech from all our panellists, outlining their vision for a new Ireland, and followed by some questions as well from myself to the panellists, and then we'll be taking questions from the floor as well. So I would like to invite David Cullinan, Sinn Féin TD, up to the podium to start. David Cullinan is a Sinn Féin politician who has been a Teachta Dála for the Waterford constituency since the 2016 general election. He previously served as a senator for the Labour panel from 2011 to 2016. So, thank you very much.
Acáirde Fáilte Rómh go léir. First of all, I want to welcome guests who have travelled from outside of Waterford and welcome you to Waterford City, and to say that I'm very pleased to be part of this event here today. And I know that Ireland's Future has held similar events already in different counties and also abroad, and I want to commend Ireland's Future for hosting these events and giving us the opportunity to have a discussion and a debate about Ireland's future. And I very much welcome having the opportunity to debate members of the panel and to listen to what they have to say, but also members of the audience as well. So you're all very welcome. I suppose I'll start by saying the obvious. I'm a United Irelander. I'm an Irish Republican. So anything I say obviously has to be seen through that lens. I believe in Irish unity. I believe in the purpose of Irish unity. I believe in the logic of Irish unity. And I believe that it makes sense. But I also believe that as we debate Irish unity and as politics changes on the island of Ireland, and as we begin to shape what that new Ireland will look like, we also have to engage with those who don't agree with us. And we have to have discussions and we have to have dialogue in relation to what that Ireland will look like. And I'm obviously cognizant of the fact that there are people who live on the island of Ireland who are not Republican, who are not nationalist, who are unionist, and who come from a different tradition and have a different view of what that Ireland would look like. And that's healthy, and that's why I believe debate is very, very important. It's also important to state from the outset that the Good Friday Agreement was overwhelmingly endorsed by the people of Ireland, North and South. And politics, in my view, fundamentally changed on the island as a consequence of the Good Friday Agreement. It was endorsed, obviously, overwhelmingly in the south of Ireland, but also in the north, where over 70% of people voted yes. And for me, that was a big game changer. And we've seen huge change in politics in the north, and in my view, real positive change. But we've also seen many elements of the Good Friday Agreement, unfortunately, which have not been implemented. And the promise of the agreement, particularly in the area of rights, has not been vindicated and has not been implemented. And that in part has led to a lot of the frustrations that we've seen in the Assembly in the North in the last number of years. But the Good Friday Agreement itself was a turning point, and it was underpinned by equality, by parity of esteem, but also by that overwhelming vote of the people across the island of Ireland. But it also places a responsibility on both the British and Irish governments. They are co-guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement. That places a legal, a moral and a political responsibility on both the British government and Irish government to ensure that all elements of the Good Friday Agreement are not just delivered, but are also protected. And of course, one of those elements was the provision for a unity referendum. And a unity referendum was one of the key elements of the Good Friday Agreement. The agreement in itself was a compromise. The agreement was a compromise from all sides, including from Republicans. But central to it was that it allowed for a peaceful transition to a united Ireland, and to allow those who believe in a united Ireland to argue for it, to mobilise for it, to politically organise for it. And I think we're seeing that happen, not just from my own party, but from others, obviously, who believe in a united Ireland as well. And in my view, the Good Friday Agreement did not settle the constitutional question. It asked the question, and it leaves it open to the people of Ireland to at any time make that change if that's their wish. And for me, that's hugely important. I want to make sure that when we have a debate, and as we debate it, it also has to be in a structured way. And I believe that there is a responsibility on the Irish government to create the structures and to create the place where we can have that debate across Civic Ireland and across the entire island of Ireland in a very structured way, which is why Sinn Féin has called for a citizens' assembly. I know that the Taoiseach established the Shared Island Unit, which I welcome, and obviously it has a purpose. There has been people in the Oireachtas, like Jim O'Callaghan and Neil Richmond and many others, who have set out their views on what a united Ireland would look like, and set out their views on structures, on how we get there. But one of the things, in my view, that we have to get right is not just the timing of the referendum. And we're not calling for a referendum tomorrow or next month or even next year on Irish unity. What we're calling for is the planning to start first. And planning is really important, because if you don't plan, if you don't have debate, if you don't have discussion, you fall into a referendum at some point without having planned. And that's what happened with Brexit. And I come from the point of view that Brexit was bad for Ireland. And indeed, I would argue it's bad for the people of Britain. But they made that decision. That was a democratic vote. But there was no planning leading up to it. And if you look at the element of it which impacted on Ireland very fundamentally, and that's the border, it was an afterthought to the politicians and to those who argued for Brexit in Britain, and they gave very little thought to Ireland before and during the referendum campaign. But of course, when the campaign was over, it became very obvious that Ireland was central to Brexit happening or not happening, and it created all of the problems it did and still does when you look at all of the issues in relation to the protocol. So for me, I believe in United Ireland because I think it makes sense. I'm the Sinn Féin health spokesperson. I don't believe it makes sense that you have two health systems, north and south. I don't believe it makes sense that you don't share the resources that we have in healthcare across the island. Today I was in Derry, and a couple of months ago was also in Derry, where I visited Magee University, that has now an all-island medical training college. I know that there are people who are travelling from the south and who are part of that training college who hopefully will go on and become GPs and work down south. I'll be in Newry in Armagh tomorrow visiting Daisy Hill Hospital. That's a hospital that's obviously a border hospital. It does treat patients from Monaghan and from other parts of the south as well. So it makes sense that we have a health service that shares the resources and utilises the resources of the island from a research perspective, but also from a health delivery perspective. I believe in the benefits of the all-island economy. It's growing all of the time. €7 billion this year alone was the size of the all-island economy, and it's growing. And I think it will, and cross-border trade, I should say, and it's growing and it will get bigger and bigger. But obviously, it would be better if the island was integrated. I believe it would be better to better equip the island to deal with climate action if we had a united Ireland. We saw with the pandemic and COVID-19 that having two different policy responses wasn't ideal. And in fact, we didn't have the type of joined up response politically, but also medically and from a health perspective, because of the fact that we had two different systems that weren't talking to themselves, and we didn't have the appropriate responses to equip the island to deal with COVID. So for all of those reasons and more, I believe in a united Ireland. And I think that's the benefit of having discussion and dialogue. We can talk all of these issues out. The final point I'll make is, I think, a really important one for me. In any debate in a united Ireland, and I've always said this, I don't want to live in a united Ireland to see people from a unionist or British tradition treated in a united Ireland the way nationalists were treated in a partitioned Ireland. So people who are British, in my view, will always be British if that's what they want to be. We have to respect not just their identity, but their culture and their rights. That will present real challenges for nationalists and Republicans as we have that discussion about what that new Ireland will look like, what the political infrastructure and architecture will look like, what that means in terms of that new Ireland. So it mightn't be the type of united Ireland that some Republican and nationalists would have believed it to be. It has to be an Ireland which fully protects the rights of those who are British. And that's why it's really important that we have that debate, and that unionists and those in unionism who are prepared to have that debate are part of that discussion. And I very much would welcome that as well. And I know that through this initiative, there has been many from the unionist community who have been part of these debates. And for me, it's really important. There are people who will never engage in the debate. There are people, and obviously politicians from the unionist community, who will push against any debate on a united Ireland, who don't want to see any discussion on constitutional change, and that's also their right to do so. But it doesn't prevent us, and it should not prevent anybody, and it certainly shouldn't prevent an Irish government who believes in Irish unity, if that's what they believe, to start planning and to start putting in place the infrastructure and the architecture to plan. So that's my vision. I want to see citizens' assembly. I want to see a proper debate. I look forward to a debate with panellists here today, and from questions from people in the audience. And hopefully over the next while, not just in Waterford, but right across the island. And I think a border poll is inevitable. It is going to happen at some point. But let's get it right. Let's make sure that we plan. Let's make sure it's respectful. And let's make sure that that debate is inclusive and is a debate for everybody. Gurab Margaret.
Thank you, David. So now I'd like to invite Dr. Jennifer Kavanagh to the podium. Dr. Jennifer Kavanagh is a law lecturer in Waterford Institute of Technology, and she holds a PhD in law from Trinity College Dublin and specialises in constitutional law and electoral law.
So thank you very much for inviting me to talk here this evening, and it's actually very fitting that we are having one of these conversations in Waterford, which is the home of the Irish flag, which is about the peace between nationalists and loyalists, and it's something that has been ongoing. And with the Good Friday Agreement, it was crystallising in the Irish Constitution that if there was to be any movement towards uniting both parts of Ireland, that it would be done by vote and by peaceful means. Now, with the vote, that is something that is only within the gift of the Westminster government, specifically the Northern Irish Secretary for State. So they are the ones that will decide when that vote happens. So if it is a case that there is to be a vote, that we may as well plan what we need to discuss around it, because the original border that was put in was something that was put in as part of the treaty on Irish independence, and the border was something that was just put there and decided on within a couple of months, couple of years. So if we are to have a vote on Irish unity, democratically expressed through peaceful means on both sides of the border as stated in the Constitution, that it is perfect time that there is an open conversation on what that actually means. And from my perspective as a constitutional law lecturer, why I'm here this evening, is that people are aware and that there is the proper checks and balances that are put into any possible vote that any people may face in the future. And I won't be taking my full 5 minutes, but that's just setting up my stall for where I'll be coming from this evening.
Thank you, Jennifer. Now I'd like to invite Andrew Clark to the podium. Andrew grew up in a strong unionist community, but supports the idea of a united Ireland. He is an activist, history student, and owner of website Tonistry, which boasts over 22,500 followers, with articles on accessible history and opinion pieces on the relationship between heritage and contemporary issues.
Hello, thanks for having me. It's my first time down to Waterford. I haven't been this far south before, but it's lovely and I'm enjoying it so far. It's a shame we have to go back up north. As I said, my name's Andrew. I come from a Protestant Unionist background, but I fell away from it at a young age. I think about 2012, whenever it burst up into a horrible sort of radical politics that I didn't really like and I didn't see any future in. And I don't think I'm the only one with that opinion. And the big part of what I like to do is find other voices that are like that. I believe that the United Ireland provides solutions, it provides a future that at the minute partition politics can't. And I've seen time and time again the constant cycle of stagnant politics, whether north or south, that are rooted in a failure to take really creative approaches to politics. And I think in the north in particular, we're paralysed at the minute by Brexit. We're paralysed by the fact that we can't move past this us and them division. And politics that stems from the border that has left us as an afterthought every time, whether it's from Westminster or for anywhere, it leaves us behind with every single thing. And as frustrating as it is, it's exciting to kind of think of a blank slate for United Ireland, something that can fix problems and create maybe something new and better instead of just something old or an old version, something new entirely, something that we can build, maybe new institutions, new solutions to problems, and it'll give us an approach that no one else has had before. And I think it's a very unique opportunity. It's one we need to take advantage of, and it would be a shame, I think, to let the conversation be put down by people who don't want to engage. That the conversation's been growing over the years. It is really rolling now. There's more and more people getting involved from all backgrounds, and that's something I like to encourage. I like to see people who might be assumed not to be part of that conversation join into it. People from all backgrounds, whether they're Protestant Unionist or Irish Catholic or anything else. I like to see people get involved, whether they're opposed or for it. The point is that they have a seat at the table, and that's a lot of what I like to encourage. And I think the North and the South can benefit from a United Ireland. I think it makes far more sense in the situation at the minute, and rather than another 10, 20 or 100 years of just paralysed politics, I think I'd like to see something new. And I don't think I'd take me 5 minutes either, for that's all I've got, but I think that's the main points anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And now I'd like to invite Niall Gaffney to the podium. Niall is from a small rural village of Devlin, County Westmeath, and Niall is a self-employed barrister working in both Dublin and the Midland Circuit, and was elected as Uachtaráin Ógra Fianna Fáil this year at the organisation's youth conference in Dunglow, County Donegal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to start by thanking Ireland's Future for inviting me here to join the panel, join in the discussion on what is something that is so important, particularly in such a constructive manner. My name is Niall Gaffney. I'm the Uachtaráin of Ógra Fianna Fáil. Ógra is the youth wing of Fianna Fáil and is organised on an all-island basis. And we have members right across the island. Particularly in recent years, we've seen members from Northern Ireland serve on our Central Officer Board and indeed on the Ord Comhairle Fianna Fáil. And those members have fed directly into the policies and policy submission of Ógra and indeed the senior party. The topic for discussion tonight is a new Ireland and a vision for a new Ireland. And my vision of a new Ireland isn't simply 6 counties joining 26 or 26 joining 6, but instead a 32 county Ireland united in its people. A country built on the principles of social and civil justice and equality and liberties and freedoms. A country that holds the values and respects the values of each and every citizen and holds each citizen equal to the last and to the next. When talking about working towards this united Ireland, this new Ireland, 2 things bring immediately to mind, and that's the duty on us. Firstly, I think there's a significant duty and obligation on our elected representatives when entering these discussions and having these talks. That duty is to make sure if such a significant development at such a significant question as United Ireland is put forward, that the people deserve to know a clear roadmap, information, certainty about what a new Ireland will look like. One of the things we've learned from Brexit is what happens when there's that lack of certainty. So I say that there is a duty on our elected representatives to continue to work and build cross-border relations, to be respectful of other communities, to engage and to understand how better to incorporate and work together. I also say there's a significant obligation on us, particularly the youth of this island. I'm 25 years of age. The vast majority of people in my generation did not experience firsthand the atrocities, the terror, or the horror that predated the Good Friday Agreement. We're the generation that benefited from peace. We're the generation that has enjoyed unrestricted travel and access right across this island. The generation who had the freedom to choose whether to study in Belfast or Dublin or anywhere else on the island, where to seek employment, where to staycation. We're the generation that has benefited from peace and have so many freedoms and liberties. And the obligation on us is to ensure that the peace of this island and the respect that comes with that is cherished and never once taken for granted. And we also have to ensure that the generations after us appreciate and understand the significance of that. Because from that peace, we are achieving so much together across this island. I look forward to the discussion tonight, and I look forward to the questions. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Niall. And now finally, I'd like to invite John Mcsweeney to the podium. John is the president of the Waterford Chamber of Commerce 2021 to 2022. He is passionate about everything that's good about Waterford, the people and business opportunities, and works and supports businesses and communities to make the city and county even greater for future generations. John was also president of New Ross and District Chamber in 2017, having served on its board since 2013, as well as being involved in South East Chamber activities.
Thank you very much, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the opportunity to join the debate on what Ireland's future could and should like in the years ahead. And obviously, coming from a chamber perspective, I have more a business slant than anything else, but obviously business is one of the core drivers of activity across the entire island, and it's so important. As President of Chamber of Commerce and a member of Waterford's own Find Your Future group, a partnership that's been set up between the public and private sector business leaders in the city, there are many similarities which we as a region and the country as a whole have in common. We message for the reasons of investment, infrastructure, connectivity, workforce, quality of life. We advocate for business that support jobs and in turn improve the quality of life for all our residents. We encourage business startups, work with economic development agencies, private industry, academia and government. As a membership organisation with 600 members, our approach as a chamber is mirrored across the country. We are competitive in nature and make no excuse for pushing for continued investment through both national and local government and their agencies, as well as private sector investment. This is a tradition built up over many years and will continue into the future for all chambers across the entire island. Aligned to these development goals is the opportunity for chambers across the country to encourage and engage society in general in creating an environment where people have life opportunities, access to government services, feel valued, safe, and are respected for what and who they are. As part of the National Development Plan, we are seen here as a region which is an alternative to the strong East, where our capital is sprawling beyond its traditional geography and has, in some people's views, become impersonal, expensive and challenging in terms of access to services, commute times and normal living experiences. The National Development Plan calls out investment actions which will be supported in creating a region with a strong alternative to Dublin and we have the capacity to take on such growth, as indeed do other regions throughout the country. I've listened to some of the debates that have taken place across the country and what Ireland of the future should look like. Certainly there has been a shift in societal attitude towards what people deserve from life, how challenging life can be, and the drop in standards of living experienced by many in our communities. Challenging has become a popular word used to describe people's daily lives. What will an advancement of Ireland look like? What would it look like from a business perspective? The challenges of operating across the country, the business metrics that are about the bottom line, the digital impact, operating across borders, countries, and building strong, educated workforces that can push ahead and contribute to and build a stronger society for everyone's benefit. So whilst we continue to build business networks through chambers, local government and other development agencies that are the foundation of revenue generating activities to support the growth of the country, we hear of the debate that has taken root on building across the entire island. Political aspirations aside, this approach will challenge, but it's also a constitutional aspiration of many that cannot be set aside in the years ahead as we develop as a country. For some, they want no change, while others don't care whether it happens or not. Such attitudes are not in themselves wrong, but the importance of debate and getting more people to engage will encourage that future focus. What we want for ourselves and our families in the years ahead, talk of the past weakens the argument. What we have seen in the past is changing. Diversity and inclusion are what we are about, how we treat others, how we expect to be treated, and how we should be able to access services like health, education, housing, and social welfare. If in time this step is taken, once much debate and presentation of facts, figures, and to support the argument from both sides, what actually will be the benefit of an all-Ireland approach? A new Ireland, a stronger Ireland, with more opportunities for all of the citizens, a bigger economy, and as much as the Good Friday Agreement followed many years of conflict, a new Ireland would in time demonstrate a further step on the positive actions that delivered that agreement. What we must, however, deal with now is the Brexit situation and how, as much as we talk about a hard border, a border in the sea, a border wherever the UK will want it to be, this debate will no doubt build a need for eliminating such matters and standing alone as an island, aligned to Europe and an even bigger English-speaking area within the EU and all the benefits that that would bring in terms of FDI. Building a united Ireland is about building a new Ireland where we can make and take business and society to the next level. So in conclusion, the process of how we get there will require much debate, soul-searching, planning, and building on activities in place between Northern Ireland and the Republic already established since the Good Friday Agreement. How will it feel? What will change in terms of the political landscape? What opportunities will be available for people? And how will standards of living change? For the better? As we continue that debate, let's hope those challenges will deliver with clear plans, looking at beyond and thinking about what can be rather than what can't be. Speaking at an All-Ireland climate change event in Belfast in 2021, and Taoiseach Micheál Martin commented in a way that whilst best sums up the climate challenge ahead, can easily be adapted to the many social and business challenges in the context of a new Ireland. To be fully effective on climate action, we need joined-up policy approaches and coordinated investment on a cross-border basis. These are the steps that must be taken now and over the coming years to align our activities and prepare for the change that people speak of and desire. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And now we're just in time for the next session of this event. So now I'd like to pose some questions to our panellists. I'll start with you, David. With increasing popularity for Sinn Féin, both North and South, for the first time, if Sinn Féin are to be elected as the next government in an all-island situation, along with your aspirations to potentially be the next health minister, What would you do to better the health crisis in the country, especially with a population then of 7 million in the state in that case? How do you envisage dealing with that?
Well, in the first instance, we have to get into government, so there's nothing inevitable about politics. And while opinion polls are opinion polls, obviously our focus over the next number of years will be to argue for a new type of politics on this island. And our immediate focus, obviously, is on the election in the north, and that could be transformative, and we'll have to wait and see what happens next week. If we are given the privilege of serving in government in the south, and we happen to have the First Minister post in the north as well, I very much hope that we would have the Ministry for Health in the north, and I would also hope that if we're in government in the south, we will also have the health portfolio. I've said over the last number of months as I've travelled the island as Sinn Féin's health spokesperson and the main opposition health spokesperson, I've been in 16 counties, I visited 18 hospitals, I was in Derry, Armagh, Tyrone, and I was also in many counties, obviously, in the south. And I've had really good engagement with healthcare professionals, hospital managers, nurses, doctors, and many more, obviously, people who work in the healthcare sphere. And all of those people want change, and they recognise that there are good things about the two systems, or the two health systems, north and south. Obviously, the NHS type system in the north has its benefits. There's free universal GP access, free primary care, for example, but it also has real challenges. There's wait times for access to GP care. We also have far too many people on health waiting lists, and while my party is in government in the north, I don't for a second excuse the crisis that we have in healthcare in the north, but we also have a crisis here. We have across the island 1.1 million people on acute hospital waiting lists, and when you include community waiting lists and diagnostics, it's 2 million. So what would we do? I believe in an Irish National Health Service, and I think central to any referendum on Irish unity, and I'm deeply conscious of this, health will be a big issue, because people in the north obviously want to hold on to the best of what is the National Health Service, even though it has been crucified by Tory cuts. And people in the south obviously have an aspiration for a better health service here. The path, in my view, has been laid north and south, where we had the Bengoa report in the north and we had the Sláinte Care report in the south, and both set out, for me, a very similar path on how to transform healthcare. And when I was in Derry today, I was at Altnagelvin Hospital, which is a cross-border hospital that provides cross-border cancer care. As I said, it was in McGee University that has cross-border teaching colleges. I'll be in Newry tomorrow visiting Daisy Hill Hospital, as I said, which obviously treats patients from the south as well. So if I was Minister for Health here, the first thing I would do is reach out to my colleague in the north, whoever that is. If it's a Sinn Féin health minister, obviously that would be easier. But it doesn't matter who it is. If it's a unionist or an alliance or whoever the minister needs to be, health minister is, I will engage with that person and look at how do we leverage the resources of the island to create a better healthcare system. And as was said already about the benefits of having a debate on Irish unity, it is in many ways a blank slate and a clean slate where we can take the best of both and create a health service that benefits everybody. There's two things, and I'll finish on this, there's two things that for me will be transformative when it comes to dealing with the challenges that we have in healthcare. The first is that we need to train more professionals. We don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough GPs, we don't have enough nurses to provide the care that's needed, north and south. It's a problem in the south, but it's also a problem in the north. Increasingly, we're seeing in the south people having difficulties accessing GPs. We need to recruit 1,600 GPs to stand still over the next 5 years in this state, but we're only training about 230 a year. So we need to train more professionals, and I think we need to do it on an all-island basis. There's no reason why we can't utilise the resources of the two higher education departments and health departments to make that happen. And the second is obviously capacity. So you have to put capacity into hospitals. We've made a commitment in the budget our campaign launch for the election in the north just gone, that we want to see €1 billion of additional spending in health in the north over the next 3 years. And obviously if there's an election in the south, we will set out what we will do there. But the final thing I'll say on it is this. For far too long, I've listened to politicians, particularly in the South, talk about healthcare and the Department of Health and the Ministry of Health as a poisoned chalice, or as a department that you don't want because it's full of dangers, and it's been a difficulty for ministers who've been in there, and there's so many crises in health. And I don't see it that way. I see it as an opportunity. I see many ministers of health, some of them I would assume had good intentions, but they didn't change the system and they didn't make the changes that were necessary. But I believe if you have the vision and you also have the political support and the muscle of a government behind it, and if you make changes in healthcare, it's so transformative. Imagine if you were able to really reduce waiting lists or transform the healthcare system we have here from a two-tier system to a universal healthcare system. That's really transformative. It makes a big difference to people's lives. So the health department isn't Angola. It isn't something that we should run away from. It's something that we should run to. And if we're in government, we want the health portfolio because we believe that we can make that difference.
Okay. Jennifer, this really is your area of expertise, and as you've written extensively about it as well on constitutional law, what sort of time frame or pathway even do you see for a potential referendum on Irish unity? Would there be a need for a new constitution?
Well, actually, the question about whether we need a new constitution is a very good one, because a constitution isn't just the primary laws that you have for the state, like how the government runs, the rights that we have as citizens. It also encapsulates what way you see your society running. So, for example, Ireland would have been one of the first constitutions in the 1930s to kind of go into depth on, family rights, education rights. The very early constitutions were, this is how your government runs and that's it. So if you're looking at it from just the basic law perspective of a constitution, you probably wouldn't need a new constitution. But then the second part of the constitution encapsulating the kind of country that you want, that, for example, straight off, we would need to change the article in the constitution saying what the Irish flag is, because, with Waterford being the home of the flag, that we would have hopefully have achieved that peace between the orange and the green. So things like that would need to be changed. I mean, you'd have to change like the representation ratio, which is currently in the news with the census results coming in, looking at nearly 10 new TDs. If the North is coming in, that's definitely going to be way more than 10 more new TDs coming in. So all those kind of things would need to be looked at. But if you look at the idea of the Constitution encapsulating what we are, then yes, we couldn't just continue with one document that's written by one side of the island and tell the other side of the island, well, that's working, just go with it. It would have to be a case that there would have to be that halfway house between both visions, and not just throwing a document in there saying that's working, but actually sitting down and having the conversation of what needs to be in that new constitution for a new Ireland, because it's not just one taking over the other, one being subsumed into the other. It would be a new legal entity of a united Ireland.
Okay. Andrew, I think people here tonight might be particularly quite interested in your viewpoint as someone from a unionist background now supporting the idea of a united Ireland. Tell us a little bit more about the extent of the diverse and dissenting voices within a Protestant unionist loyalist community from that background as well.
There's a perception, I think, of particularly Protestant unionists, that it's one block of people, and that it's almost an impenetrable block of people who just don't want to be disturbed, don't want to be talked to about United Ireland. But in reality, it's completely different. There are some within unionism who will never be open to the discussion, and I think that's okay. There's some people who always disagree, and it's within their right. But there's far more people, I think, within unionism who they're unionists for different reasons. There's some who are unionists purely pragmatically because maybe for their own business concerns or their own personal concerns, that's what the union means to them. To others, unionism is just what they were brought up with, and they're far more flexible than you would think. Other people, their unionism is a temporary product. It can change, it can be influenced, and I think people have never spoke about it and they've never tried to have another opinion about it. And the second that you introduce them to one, as was the case with myself, it's very hard to remain so rigid in your views once you're introduced to an alternative. And now that we're planning and speaking about real alternatives and real plans for different alternatives, I find that a lot of unionists that I know are more flexible, and it's maybe not a matter of turning them into someone, they'll bang a drum for United Ireland, but more so they're more open to the idea and they'll realise that their identity is much safer than they believe, than they realise, and unionism, instead of being just a single block to refer to anyone that is opposed to United Ireland, it can be rather people who have links to Britain, people who have a heritage that they associate with Britain. It can mean a lot of things, and not all of them necessarily have to be so vehemently against United Ireland. And I think having these conversations makes people far more flexible. And there's an entire population of the north who they have friends and family down south, and they don't really see themselves as just cut off in the corner. And I think talking to them, it's maddening to think that they couldn't be influenced about United Ireland. And as was the case with myself and many others, all you need to do is speak to them, and their problems begin to evaporate when they find solutions to them.
And you mentioned flexibility there and openness. How can people like yourself in the unionist community maybe reassure other unionists that United Ireland might not be what they really think it is?
Well, my first message to people who are maybe insecure about what a United Ireland means for their identity or for their community is that we've already had a century so far of the alternative, which is being part of the United Kingdom. And if the catastrophe with Brexit and all the carry on from it is an indication that within the United Kingdom, as the status quo, they're already not really listened to outside of here. The people who care about them are here, they're their neighbours, they're not people over necessarily in Westminster. And I think that understanding that they aren't under siege and they aren't really the enemy or an opposition, they're just our neighbours. And a United Ireland doesn't mean, as they say, it's not someone being absorbed, it's something new that they can be a part of. And I like to tell them that it's going to affect them whether they oppose it or they support it. So the best thing is to have your voice, have a seat at the table, because it is going to happen, I believe. And I think that it'll affect everyone, so everyone should have a say in it. And instead of blindly opposing it, I think being part of the conversation, at least voicing your concerns, instead of leaving it to someone uninvolved to hopefully come to bat for you, you should talk to the people who will.
Niall, what's your stance, your personal stance on a citizen assembly on this topic? Sinn Féin are backing the idea, so what's your own personal stance as Fianna Fáil see themselves as the Republican Party?
Thank you very much, Chair. A citizens' assembly on United Ireland, first and foremost, it would have to include people from right across the island. It would have to include people of all varying views to be able to get that constructive conversation. Personally, I think there would be a lot of really positive and progressive discussions could arise from a citizens' assembly. But I think the most immediate, and I mean David touched on it as well, talking about the setting up those forums for discussion and setting up the structures to be able to have these conversations and to find out what a new Ireland would look like. I mentioned the duty on elected representatives. I mean, I think to be able to add to the conversation, to get those structures together, the most important part is cross-border relations, cross-border communications, engagement with communities, and showing now, presently, how we can all work together. I mean, the Shared Ireland Fund has facilitated a huge amount of funding and investment into projects, whether it's education, with the creation of new research and development roles and funding of PhDs right across the island, whether it's the joint strategic sustainability rail review, which examines the sustainability and accessibility of rail stations. I think these are all what I think a Citizens' Assembly will progress the dialogue. I think presently there's a greater duty on our elected representatives on both sides to show we can do the work presently to try and see those structures and what can be achieved.
Okay. John, I'll move on to you next. For people that don't come from a business background, maybe enlighten us a little bit about the possible business opportunities for the island if there is a United Ireland.
Thanks, Chair. It is about the word, as you said, opportunity. You know, a substantial marketplace in the north that's there. And when you get that opportunity to look at it from a competitive perspective, it certainly, from any business point of view, it sharpens your own focus in terms of your own business to make sure you're doing the right things. There are plenty of support mechanisms that are there already in terms of the market. You have 1.2 million, I think, people. I'm not sure the exact number. But this is a new market. It's a market on the island of Ireland. it doesn't necessitate having to travel or any major flights or boat transport or anything like that. You're dealing with a market that's on your doorstep. It's a new market, and anyone in business, irrespective of what business they're in, must see this as a positive opportunity to expand their own business, to get better. But there will be challenges, and there will be successful businesses in Northern Ireland who will want to come down south. But that's the competitive nature of business, and when you have that situation, everyone benefits at the end of the day.
And you speak there on positive opportunities. What about business owners who are from a unionist background? What can they expect in the United Ireland for their market?
I think that if you're interested in business, the first thing, the reason you're interested in business is because there is a product or service that you require. If that product or service is what you want and you can get it at the right price, then it's irrelevant as to what the background of the person who provides that product or service should be. There should be no fear for anyone in terms of dealing with the North that you're dealing with, that you refuse to deal with a certain element of society because that's what they've been boxed into, and that's perhaps what you may have heard. You know, the purpose of chambers throughout the country, throughout the North, is to advocate for their members because they're worth it, because they have a valuable resource to give in terms of their business opportunity. So anyone in the North or in the South, in terms of dealing cross-border or when there's no border, should have no fear in terms of doing business into the future. And they should look at it as an opportunity and not worry about, as I would have mentioned in my speech, talk of the past is irrelevant. We have to look to the future.
And sticking with the theme of opportunities, I'm going to come back to you, David. I was watching a Channel 4 segment last night on the prospect of a united Ireland, and one older woman said, you know, some people in the North aren't worried about a united Ireland. They're simply worried about living, the standard of living improving, better wages. A united Ireland doesn't magically make everything better. So what would Sinn Féin do in making the standard of living better for everyone's lives?
Well, first of all, people can think about several things at the same time. So I think Michelle O'Neill said something a couple of weeks ago that was taken somewhat out of context when she said that people don't wake up, or a lot of people don't wake up every morning and think or talk about a united Ireland, but it doesn't mean it isn't important to them. It's one of a number of things that's important to them. But the immediate issues that are impacting on people right now is the cost of living crisis. And listen, there's an election campaign in the North, and there's a bit of auction politics as to who's going to do what in terms of the cost of living. So I'm not going to get into the specifics of what we're offering in any election campaign. Obviously, if we get into government in the South, and what we want to do in the North is to address the cost of living, particularly in relation to fuel costs. The biggest challenge I think that we have across the island at the moment is housing, and we need much more ambition from governments north and south to deal with the housing crisis, to build more affordable homes and social homes. I think that in itself will address some of the cost of living challenges for some families. The health service, as I mentioned earlier, there's a huge amount of work to be done to, on the one hand, reduce the cost of healthcare for families, but also to improve access to services. But for me, it's not that you wake up every morning and think about a united Ireland. It's that you see a united Ireland in the context of what the future will look like. And it isn't anybody's single vision, because we were asked earlier to outline our own vision for a united Ireland. The magic of a referendum and the magic of having the opportunity to actually plan for a new Ireland is that it belongs to everybody. Everybody's opinion is valid, and we can actually reimagine many things. Like, we've had real transformative changes in the South in relation to marriage equality, in relation to health reproductive rights for women. I want to see the same in the North. And there's huge amounts of work that can be done, more work in all of those areas. And just to finish on a point that was raised earlier about the all-island economy, and the point that John was making, I speak to many, many unionist business people who see potential in an all-island economy. And it's not that they see potential in it, they're already experiencing it. The all-island economy is roaring and will continue to roar despite partition, but it will only get better if the country isn't partitioned, and if we have a united Ireland. And the one thing business people are is they're pragmatic, and they will look at what's best for them and what's best for their businesses. Brexit was an absolute disaster for businesses in the north, and would have been a disaster. There are many businesses in Britain who clearly understood that a hard border was going to be a disaster, and they embraced the protocol that was put in place. They can see that the protocol gives up them an advantage in where they have almost the best of all worlds. And they're just aghast when they see unionist politicians rail against the protocol. They just can't understand it because they come from a pragmatic position that this doesn't make sense. So it goes back to the very first thing I said about, for me, why I'm an Irish Republican and why I'm a United Irelander. It's not because I have any romantic notion of a United Ireland. It's because for me, it just makes sense. It's pragmatic. It's something that just is common sense. If we have two systems that are not working, and you end partition and you have an island that shares and utilises all of its resources, but the same for business. And yes, the cost of living is the big challenge, and it presents challenges for all political parties. So I know the Fianna Fáil is represented here as well. So
and what about infrastructure?
That's why I don't want to get into a discussion on the specifics, because for me, this debate is about much bigger than that. It's not about one election campaign. It's about what a United Ireland would look like, and creating the mechanism and the process to allow that debate to happen. We haven't arrived at that point yet, and we need to.
And just about infrastructure as well. There's no railway, for example, in Mayo Donegal. What's your plans for that?
Well, obviously, we want to see an all-island rail network. We want to see more investment in rail. It's going to be a big part of our response to climate action. There's a huge amount more that needs to be done for Ireland to reach its goals and all of the targets that collectively, well, the vast majority of the Greens in the Dáil signed up to. We supported the climate action strategy that was brought forward by the government, and indeed the sectoral budgets for each department that have now been set. Obviously, climate action is one of the big international challenges, and to achieve your goals in terms of carbon emissions and carbon reductions, you have to provide people with alternatives, and one of those is obviously public transport. So again, in whatever election campaign happens, when it happens in the south, we'll outline in detail what that will look like. But linking the island from a rail perspective, improving public transport, is a no-brainer when it comes to Ireland and the island meeting its climate action targets. And somebody mentioned Micheál Martin's comments on climate action as well, and I agreed fully with everything he said. If we want to reach our climate action targets, and if we want to do more, this is absolutely one of the areas where there is huge potential for all-island cooperation. And I would hope that the executive in the north, when we have a new executive, or if we get one up and running after the election, and the government in the south, should do much more collaboratively to enable the entire island to reach its climate action. Sorry, its climate targets, and public transport is key to that.
Okay. And I'm just really conscious of time, but I want to come back to you, Jennifer. On the topic of new communities, I think we need to bring that in. Waterford City is a multicultural place, and I'm sure some of that diversity is seen in WIT's campus as well. How do you see a united Ireland being of benefit to your students, for example, or to other people of ethnic minority backgrounds in the college?
Yeah, well, WIT is going through its own kind of reunification structures itself, joining up with Carlow next week. So we'll probably be ahead of everyone on that one. But definitely, like, I remember growing up in Waterford and hearing about what was happening in the north. It felt as relevant almost, that it was as geographically close as what was happening in the Balkans, because down here was such a quiet little, corner of Ireland that didn't feel like it had that much of a connection. But I mean, still an awful lot of my students would not have gone to the north. So they wouldn't even think of getting in the car and going to Belfast or going to Derry. So definitely we need to open up education between both sides. So you don't have students who have just lived all their life in Waterford, maybe went to Cork for holidays, maybe Dublin, and just think of, the big up there. We've never been there. And, there's some fantastic research being done in the north. Like, I've done research with Colin Harvey in Queen's, and even some of our funding programs down here, there was one new foundations for the Shared Island Unit, which you couldn't apply for if you're in the north. So automatically pushing them out of the conversation. So, I mean, European funding and everything that's been impacted by Brexit, you know, education, especially third level, it's always very collegiate. Everyone tends to work together. And that's something that can work more, and definitely getting more students in and from different parts of the island and across the world. It benefits everyone, not just the education of the person coming over, but everyone else's exposure to everyone else who lives on the island and on the planet.
And I also want to touch on the Irish language as well, and it's a really important part of this conversation tonight as well. So, Niall, I'm going to come to you. What's your personal stance and also Ógra Fianna Fáil's stance on the Irish language in a potential new constitution?
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, well, the Irish language is our first language, the Bunreacht na hÉireann. It's an integral part of a lot of people's identity. I myself, I have some conversational Irish. I couldn't claim to be fluent. But in Ógra, and particularly in Fianna Fáil at large, it's given a huge priority. In Ógra, we have our own Irish and cultural officer. We run Irish classes every year. It is a central part, and it's if anyone wants to improve their Irish or people want to converse through it, there are always events and facilities to do that. Facilities I've taken up myself. But it's part of our identity. In a new Ireland, one of the fundamental pillars of a new Ireland will have to be respect for different cultures. And if there are people in a new Ireland who simply don't identify or don't feel the Irish language is part of their identity, I think we'd have to be very respectful and we'd have to acknowledge that. But I do think, particularly in a new Ireland, it will, for anyone who believes it's part of their identity, then there's a very significant role for it in it.
And you speak there on people respecting other people's identities. Do you think Ireland is doing that enough? I mean, fascism, for example, has grown across Europe, including Ireland. How do you see fixing that?
Yeah, I think I'd need about 4 hours to talk. But for example, I come from a lovely little rural village in Westmeath, and I went to college in Galway. I moved to Dublin and work in Dublin, and straight away, the cities, Dublin and Galway, they're such amazing environments of mixtures of cultures. I think there is a great acceptance and a great environment around this. For example, and I think it was touched on, when you go to college, it's so normal to make friends with someone who might not come from the same economic or regional or anywhere that you're from yourself. It is a very welcoming place, I think, but there are absolutely issues that need to be addressed. And I think, in fairness to the government and the elected representatives, huge strides have been taken towards new criminal legislation regarding hate crimes, and particularly crimes that target people from different backgrounds or different origins.
Okay. So now we have time now to take questions from the floor. Would anyone like to pose a question? Yeah, yourself.
Hillary Delahunty is on spoke with me at Fastman Jordan. Obviously, one produced waves of Gawad and Nadini. Den agrahori san crino shin anocht agus Nadini tá Giannis on Tulky in a hair and a bag na thorhi the vor ober Solaire sna blianta tá chap. Tá chéise gom den Niall Gaffney agus cuirg mé as béirle é tá massam féin go shin. I'm going to want to put this to you, Niall, and I hope that you'll understand that I'm putting it to you not as an enemy or as trying to point score, but rather as somebody who has a Fianna Fáil background. My father's people were very Republican, we're all Sinn Féin from start to finish, but my mother's people were very strong Fianna Fáilers. My mother used to often say that when the Aylward started canvassing in Kilkenny, they started at the Murphys in Grange, and they went from there. And so we were brought up with Fianna Fáil being a very important part of our heritage and our culture, and always knew that we had that very strong Fianna Fáil background. My grandfather, Martin Murphy, was a Fianna Fáil councillor, and I'm not trying to boast, I simply want you to understand where I'm coming from, because I will be critical in a few moments, if you don't mind, about Fianna Fáil. He was a Fianna Fáil councillor. He was co-opted onto the council in Kilkenny after the death of Neddy Doyle, the great Kilkenny hurler, and he spent 2 years as a Fianna Fáil councillor. He didn't run for election, even though he was asked to, because he couldn't stand having to be brought back up from the fields because people used to be coming down to him. It didn't suit him. But certainly he enjoyed his time as a Fianna Fáil county councillor. He was a very strong Republican up to the very last day he died. I don't think he would recognise the Fianna Fáil party that he joined and was such an important part of. That was such an important part of his life. It seems to me that not only the present leader of Fianna Fáil, but quite a large number of Fianna Fáilers have sought to turn the narrative that we are all aware of around and create the impression that in actual fact Fianna Fáil is some sort of wishy-washy Republican party that had nothing to do with the militant Republican struggle of the last of the 25 years up to 1994. They conveniently ignore things like the arms trial. They conveniently ignore things like when Bobby Sands was dying, two of the three people who went to see him were Sheila De Valera, an extraordinary woman, and Neil Blaney, Harry Blaney or Neil Blaney. Can't quite remember which one of the two of those, but great Republicans. Again, he was independent Fianna Fáil at the time. I have. I want to put the question to Niall now, and you won't mind.
If you
Niall,
don't mind to round it up a bit, just
briefly.
on.
And the question I want to put to you is that it seems to me that Fianna Fáil have tried to put behind them the republicanism that is an essential part of their makeup. If they do that, and if they continue to do it, they will lose votes because they might be able to have a good housing policy, they might be able to have a policy on taxation, but once they lose the essential part of themselves, which is Fianna Fáil, the Republican Party, then people will stop voting for them. And you can see that happening today. They've already lost those Republican votes to Sinn Féin. Now, I'm going to tell you straight out, I vote Sinn Féin now. My mother does, my sister does. They were all Fianna Fáilers. You're losing votes by your present policy. And that's not going to work. And you're going to suffer in the end. I'm putting that to you. I thank my friend for reminding me about the time. But I want you to know what I'm putting to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I didn't catch your first name.
Sorry, Hilary Delahunty is my name.
Hilary, how are you? Thank you very much for that, Hilary. And I know you have a very long and very committed family history to Fianna Fáil. Personally, I'm first generation Fianna Fáil. I know what you made some very clear and strong comments about Fianna Fáil essentially abandoning its Republican values. I'd have to say, and I'm sure you won't be surprised when I say I disagree strongly with that. In fact, I think the Fianna Fáil is very proud to call itself the Republican Party. And one of its core aims is working towards the peaceful and democratic reunification of Ireland, the will of the people. But I think a fundamental part of working in line of that republicanism is to show that we are comfortable with our views and we're comfortable and confident and able to engage with people who disagree with us or don't hold those same views. And some of the substantial and significant work that's been done by Fianna Fáil, particularly in this government, towards significant investment in issues like I mentioned earlier, the rail review, but the opening these dialogues and showing the strength, showing what we can achieve currently, working with the executive, showing that together a united Ireland can continue to achieve great things. So I thank you for your question. I note it, and very strongly, I don't think either of us will change each other's minds tonight. But I do disagree. I think that there's Fianna Fáil values its republicanism to the core, and it's showing that by engaging in this positive work and the increase and the significant work in cross-border relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Niall. You yourself? And please state your name as well.
My name is Edward Denniston, and one of the questions I'd like to ask, and perhaps our first question illustrated it, is that if there is to be, and I would say maybe Ireland's Future is the wrong title, maybe the organisation should be Ireland's Future, the island's future, in order to unhinge us from language that we've already seen is burdened with, clogged in the mire of history. And the new future of Ireland I see is going to relinquish that and be generous. And if we're going to talk about Republican credentials, My ancestors, Hans and Alexander Denniston, fought in 1798 in North Longford against the forces, the British forces, which they saw in correspondence as the English forces. So, yet, during the Troubles in what you call the Northern Ireland, and this is the point I want to make, of course, there was a lot of Southern Presbyterians that were persona non grata, who were blow-ins, right? And I just feel that the question I'm going to ask is this: should the language around a referendum or an all-Ireland constituency, let's call it an all-Ireland jurisdiction, which I would love to see, is the language to change at the last minute when we're about to have the referendum, or should we be considering the language now? For example, republicanism is invoked as if there's only a certain section in the room. We're all Republicans here. We live in a country that is a republic under the definition. My worry about an element of, if you might say, the unionist culture in the north of Ireland is that there is an element there, as there is an element down here, who actually don't want a republic.
Thank you very much.
They want
Just
something else.
conscious
So
of
my
time.
question is, should we look at the language first or wait until afterwards?
Jennifer, would you like to take that as the academic?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, if it was to be a referendum, it would be a specifically worded question to deal with Articles 2 and 3. But when it would come to the question itself, that would have a legal framework. But you're absolutely right. Words matter, language matters, and there needs to be a common understanding of what the question would be, what the ideas would be. And you're absolutely right. We are a republic. We don't have a monarchy. But the word republic, republican, does mean different things, and it is part of the conversation that needs to be had.
David, you would like to come in there as well?
Yeah, just to go back to actually the first point, if I can, hopefully if we have a meeting like this in 10 years' time and we've had two Sinn Féin governments or terms of government, Hillary won't be sitting there as an erstwhile Sinn Féin voter. So I suppose it does come down to what we all do when we are in government. And I just want to make the point, because there's a long contribution that Hillary made. No one party should seek to have a monopoly in Irish republicanism. And I certainly see Niall as a Republican, of course he is, and there are people in Fianna Fáil that are Republicans. The problem that I see, and it's not just Fianna Fáil, it's Fine Gael and others as well, the problem for them, and it's something that they have to confront themselves, is that when they talk about the North, it's very more often about attacking Sinn Féin and not about looking to the future and having a discussion about what's good about the North, but what's good about a united Ireland, and having those discussions. So I think that's a problem for them, but obviously that's something that they need to address. But in relation to language, obviously language is important. And for me, as we embark on this journey now to hopefully create this new Ireland and create a united Ireland, there's no inevitability about anything. So people who think that it's inevitable that we will have a united Ireland are wrong. You have to work for it, you have to agitate, you have to persuade, and you have to plan. And that's why the planning is important. But you also have to challenge yourself. So we have to challenge ourselves as Republicans and as nationalists. So in the Ireland that we envisage, do we really mean that that's a place for people who see themselves as British? What does that mean for them? And what does that mean for us when it comes to all sorts of issues? And the Constitution was mentioned earlier. I genuinely, and I believe this with every fibre of my being, I genuinely don't want to live in a united Ireland where people in the North, or indeed anywhere on the island, who see themselves as British or Unionist, do not have their rights, cultural, political rights, respected in that Ireland. Because we saw what happened in the North when we had denial of rights for nationalists and all that went with that. So we really need to make sure that as part of that debate, that's front and centre. And that will mean that we have to challenge ourselves. And I was writing down words as you were, before you finish, and generous was one of the words I wrote down as well. We have to be open, we have to be generous, and I think we have to challenge ourselves. And that's exciting as well. It creates challenges, but it's also, for me, it's exciting because we always should challenge ourselves. And I think that's going to be a really important part of that discussion as it evolves.
I'm just conscious of other voices being heard as well. Any questions for Andrew or John? Yeah. Yourself?
Yeah, I've got a question for Andrew. Really enjoyed the panel discussion tonight. Andrew, as a Northerner, you might have an opinion on this. We hear on a regular enough basis from people who are opposed to Irish unification or border pull about the inevitability of violence in the event of a successful border pull where people from North and South vote in favour of Irish unification. Do you have an opinion on the inevitability of it, or do you think it is just simply being raised by those who are opposed to the concept of Irish unification as a fear factor?
I think for a start, generally, whenever people think or worry that there'll be a second conflict if there's a united Ireland, I think for some it demonstrates that it's a misunderstanding about why the troubles happened, because the conflict wasn't over whether or not there would be a united Ireland. And I think the idea that there'll be a return to violence is usually rolled out by people who accuse one side or the other, saying, well, they say if they don't get their way, they'll do this, or if we don't get our way, we'll do this. Nobody has a stomach for it. And if you speak to people in Northern Ireland, particularly people who lived through it, the notion of going back to that is unthinkable, no matter what the constitutional arrangement is. And there will be some who mostly didn't live through it, who'll go out and they'll, bang a drum and wave a stick and say this, that, and the other, and they'll allude to things in the past and major events and it's happening now. But really, the notion that people will take up arms again over wanting to share the island or build something new is unthinkable to everyone in Northern Ireland. I would say it's unthinkable to everyone in the rest of Ireland. And the idea that it's inevitable is usually used as a fear tactic, I find, because, as I say, the conflict happened, people lived through it, and I don't think anyone who lived through it wants to go back to it. And the people like myself who have benefited so much from an imperfect peace, but a peace all the same, I've no want or desire to entertain any notion of ending it. And I think it's very important that we cherish it, even if it isn't quite perfect.
Thank you. Any questions, business questions? Yourself.
Hi, it's not a business question. I'm a PhD researcher and I'm studying the centre ground in Northern Ireland. So I'd be looking for responses maybe from Andrew and David. If a border poll was called in recent years, what factors or issues do you think would or could be most important for those who belong to the centre ground in Northern Ireland when deciding how to vote? I'm kind of looking in relation to, Alliance supporters or Green Party supporters. Thank you.
Do you want to take that?
Yeah, well, listen, if you look at the opinion polls, I think there's an opinion poll out tonight as well for the Northern election, so it'll be interesting to see what that tells us. But certainly the opinion polls over the last number of months have shown that there could be an increase in support for the Alliance Party. Mainly, it seems, coming from within the unionist community and from the DUP, and some maybe from some of the smaller parties, but that remains to be seen if that happens. But certainly, the centre ground is probably populated more by them. I'm not sure if the Greens would see themselves in that space. But I think your point maybe is that it's not as it is presented, orange or green. It's maybe something different. What issues would there be for them in a referendum? I think certainly for those from a unionist community, identity and culture would be important for them. Health is going to be, I think, an issue for everybody, including nationalists as well and Republicans, because people do cherish the free healthcare system. By and large, it's free in the north, and obviously they look at a system down here and wonder, well, what will it mean in United Ireland? So I think health will be one of the big factors in a border poll, but everything comes back to the economy. And while I think identity will be a big issue for many in the unionist community, I think overwhelmingly, if we can argue and make the point and win the argument that the island will be better off economically, and as a consequence of that, by having a better economy, that we would have progressive governments that would make sure that the benefits of that economy are shared and that we can improve people's lives, I think we can make a difference. And from a Republican perspective, we would obviously make the argument partition has failed. I don't see partition as something that's worked. I think it's been an absolute failure. Everything since everything I've seen has demonstrated to me partition is a failure. So I see that debate as an opportunity to discuss the positives of a new Ireland. And I think those who would see themselves not as orange or green, or maybe as you presented in the centre ground, I think identity, health and the economy would be the three.
Andrew, would you like to take that as well?
Yeah, I think, as was said, for people in the centre, as you say, people who you might associate with Alliance, for example, I think most people want to just wake up, go to work and have safety and prosperity for their family and for those close to them. I think issues like identity and culture are important, but I think people sometimes overthink how much they will necessarily be affected by United Ireland. I believe they'll all be improved and it'll be a boon. But for bread and butter issues, for everyday issues, people want to know about education. They want to know about how much money they'll have in their pocket, not necessarily how it'll look on a graph. How will it translate into their everyday life? And I think that for talks about United Ireland and debates about it, the point should be to offer solutions to problems created by partition, which, as was said, has been a failure. Almost all, I think, of the problems, economic and political, stem from partition in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland. So I think that offering solutions, or at the very least opening the door to conversations, will let people who would be in the centre and don't necessarily oppose or support the union and just like things the way they are because they're stable. I think saying to them that things could be improved or that things that aren't stable could be stabilised is key part of that debate to capturing that sort of centre audience.
Thank you for your question. John there, David reiterated earlier that the island would be better off economically. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I suppose the challenge really will be to make sure that we create as level a playing field as possible in terms of the support mechanisms that will be there for business into the future. We need to encourage that entrepreneurial spirit, and people should see it as an opportunity, whether you're in the north or whether you're in the south. You're in a one island situation, and anytime there's opportunity, people need to grasp it, and especially business people. They understand what an all-Ireland approach will mean for them, and it's important that the mechanism behind it, the support that's there, the funding from either local government, from national government, or from EU, that they use these monies that are available to help them to grow their business, which will ultimately lead to jobs, to prosperity, to better society, and then you come in behind that in terms of the type of society you want. But ultimately, you need to support the business growth at the bottom line, first of all, and all else stem from that. And as the rest of our speakers have mentioned, this is about society benefiting as well. And if you get the benefit from society, then everyone takes a step up in terms of their life standards and what they can achieve. And it's about what other people achieve. There's just one interesting point there. We spoke about education. I have a neighbour of mine whose daughter is going to Queen's University this year. And if you go back a number of years ago, as Jennifer would have thought, it would be in a case of you go to Cork or you go to Limerick or Galway or whatever. No disrespect to going to Galway or anything, but it was it's interesting, and there's a no fear factor. This was this person's first choice. And you get into a scenario where we spoke about the different cultures, etc. So, we talk about business, but you also talk about education. An educated workforce is a better benefit from a business point of view as well.
Thank you, John. We have 10 minutes left. Any other questions from the floor? Yourself.
What do the panel see as a reasonable running to a referendum? Are we talking about 5 years? Because I think it makes a difference to the people I've talked to, and this interesting. For example, 2 years ago, I would have voted for what they're calling, I would call it a new Ireland, not a united Ireland. I would have voted for it. Now, partly because of the discussions I've been following on Ireland's future, I'm beginning to have my doubts because, they're all, like I said to David there, to me, generosity of the people with the electoral power need to be generous to those who don't have the electoral power. And I think that's the only way we'll get this so-called united Ireland. And at the moment, I'm just beginning to I'm in two minds. So could we just have some sort of fact or throw out? I know people don't want to be held to it. In terms of, put it this way, psychologically, culturally, emotionally, what would be a good flagging time?
Thank you. Jennifer, would you like to start off with that?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that with any of the big societal questions that we've had in referendums in Ireland, like marriage equality, repeal the eighth, the Irish people have tended to be at least 10 years ahead of the actual politicians that would be putting forward the bill to amend the Constitution. So I wouldn't give an answer in terms of years, but what I would say is, in opinion polls, you're going to see a lot more questions about how would you vote if this question was put before you. Because you're not going to want a Brexit-style answer, 52-48. That's the last thing that you want to have. So you would definitely want to be in a position where polling both sides of the border, you're definitely hitting the mid-70s. And I think anything below that would be a huge gamble, because if it would be almost like the Scottish independence referendum. It should be a once-in-a-generation question. And it can't be a case of, oh, well, people feel differently now, 4 years down the road, let's go again. Because people will then get frustrated with a fear or a feeling that, like, people have a misconception with the Nice and Lisbon Treaty referendums that you gave the wrong answer, vote again, even though we got specific protocols, so it was slightly different. But it would definitely be a situation where there is a solid bank of support on both sides before you even just spend the money, because I think referendums are coming in around between 15 to 20 million to run to begin with. You're not going to want to waste that money on something that has not been pitched at the right time.
So in terms of, I think, the Good Friday Agreement, would you be in favour of changing the percentage? Because I think at the moment it's, if there's a...
Oh no, it's just a majority democratically expressed on both sides. It's not the fact that it would be, you know, you're going to change the goalpost for the actual referendum. A referendum is always going to be 40.
Written in that it's
Yes, the majority.
1%. It's
A majority is 51%. But we do not want, you would not want a situation where you're going back down a Brexit road. So what I'm saying on the numbers is the opinion polling. So when you pick up the newspaper and they say, oh, 50% in favour of this, 70% in favour of that, you would need solid numbers behind it before you could even think of putting the ballot paper in front of someone to say, right, this is your final answer.
Thank you for your question. Niall, would you like to come in there?
Yeah, I hope people don't think I have some kind of inside knowledge. Personally, I mean, thinking of a timeline for a referendum, if we just look at how much the conversation has already sped up over the last couple of years. I mean, Ireland's future here are having consistent and regular forum and panel discussions for these, and I think it's a brilliant opportunity and a brilliant dialogue to have that. And I think if we can continue with momentum that is behind the discussion at the moment, if we can continue to respectfully and openly have these talks and to figure out what the certainty of what a new Ireland will look like. I personally would like to see it done, or really like to see the referendum raised within the next decade. That's just my personal view on it.
Thank you. David, would you like to come in?
Well, we've had over 100 years of partition, so I think we can be forgiven for wanting a referendum as soon as we can get one. But we also have to be pragmatic, and we have to look at, as I said at the start, and I think most of the panellists have touched on it, it's about the preparation first, and it's about the process. I think hard lessons have to be learned on the back of Brexit, and they're not completely comparable or even comparable, but it's more about the process, that if you don't plan, which we haven't done, then you run into difficulties. The first thing that needs to happen is an Irish government has to take it seriously, and that hasn't happened. I know the Shared Island Unit is an important step in terms of looking at discussions, but we need to do much more than that. I would hope if there's a change of government and Sinn Féin was in government, we would bring a bit more urgency to it in terms of that discussion. I don't think you can wait for 70% or 80% of people to express an opinion in an opinion poll before you would look at a referendum, because The whole logic of a referendum is it allows for momentum to build up and for people to change their opinions and so on. And the Good Friday Agreement, which nobody, as far as I can see in the South at least, maybe some in the North, are looking to rewrite the Good Friday Agreement. If there's a referendum held, there's 2 referendums held concurrently, North and South, and there has to be a 50+1 vote in both jurisdictions. And that was a compromise as well, by the way, by Republicans and Nationalists. So there's 2 referendums, North and South, and it's simply 50+1. And if you're going to wait around until there's a 70% vote either in both jurisdictions, I don't think you'd ever have a referendum. And the advantage of having a referendum is you then give people the opportunity to have a real debate, and there has to be a good lead-in. I would hope in the next 5 years, I would hope no longer than the next 10 years. I don't see it happening in the next year or 2 years. And the longer we don't do the planning, and that's the point, the longer the planning doesn't happen, the longer we push out, in my view, having a border poll, which then begs the question, is that why some people won't do the planning? Because in reality, they don't want to have the referendum. And I think that's wrong, because I think it will happen. And I think in time, more and more people will demand it and will want to see it happen. Thank you, David. Very quickly, any final thoughts from other panellists?
Yeah, just in terms of, I suppose, the time frame that you mentioned, it's been 24 years, I think, since the Good Friday Agreement. We can see the advantages that have taken place since then. We can see the structures that are there at the moment in terms of existing cross-border cooperation between both governments in terms of, support each other. David mentioned the climate action. I think we need to see a ramp up in terms of those interactions over the next while. We need to see more, let's not, instead of waiting for it to happen, let's start making it happen in little steps at the moment in terms of where we can interact better with business, etc. But certainly, the support mechanisms that are there and the All-Ireland approach, I think that we can speed up that process. And as David said, I would certainly hope that, we don't have to wait for another 24 years for this to happen. Something maybe, could be 10 years, but there is a lot of work to do in terms of from political thinking, from political expressions, but also on the existing mechanisms that are there in terms of how we interact with each other. They need to be ramped up so they become more of the norm and people hear more about it.
Sorry, I'm just conscious of time.
Okay,
Thank you very much. Andrew, do you want to come in there very quickly?
Quickly, I just say that regarding when the referendum should be and how long it should take, the approach is the same one that I've always taken, is that how long is a piece of string? It's as long as you need. I think if we talk about it, for as many people as possible, address as many problems as possible. The whole reason I travelled down here from Belfast today is because it is a question for everyone. It's not just something for us in the North to stress about. It's not something for people down here to forget about. I think as long as everyone's talking about it, it will continue to gather momentum. And I personally would see within 10, 15 years, I would be shocked if there isn't a referendum, or at least very positive polling about it.
Great, thank you. Okay, so unfortunately that's all we have for tonight, and we really could have this conversation all night. It's been very interesting, but I want to say a big thank you again to Jerry Carlisle and Patricia McBride, the organisers of Ireland's Future event. This is one of their leading events ahead of their huge event in Dublin in October. And to our excellent panellists as well, David Cullinan, Sinn Féin TD, Dr. Jennifer Kavanagh, Waterford IT, Niall Gaffney, Ógra Fianna Fáil, Andrew Clark, Taoiseach, and John Mcsweeney, President of Waterford Chamber of Commerce. And a big thank you to you, our audience as well, and for your questions, and to those watching at home as well. If you want to find out more about Ireland's future, visit irelandsfuture.com. Agus Sinead, Ihawa, agus Gurmil Magi.